Tom, fair to say that it's becoming increasingly difficult to cut through the noise on nutrition. Do you think we've gone full circle from early 2010s where T Nation forums were the nutrition sources for people, and now Eddie Abu is the T Nation forum on TikTok for people? How do you manage the reels presented to you as a nutritionist yourself?
It's a messy space, that's for sure. I feel like unless I walk around a supermarket with a microphone attached to me pulling products off the shelf, I won't stand out anymore.
It's tough, isn't it? It is tough. But I think what we really want this discussion to be about is cutting through the noise and the importance of highlighting the basics. So in your opinion, having worked with professional athletes, recreational athletes, people that are just looking to shed a few pounds, whatever it might be, what are the fundamentals that you want to emphasize at this point so that we can flesh them out a little bit for people listening, so that they can know what to do with their nutrition as a starting point to learn what works for them?
Should we do them one by one?
One by one. Let's do it.
Let's start with hydration.
Cool.
Even before we're talking about food, let's talk about water.
Yep.
And it's something we all know we should do. And this is probably a common theme, potentially what we might talk about, is that it's like knowing versus doing. We know we should do it, but what we need to work out is what systems are we going to use? What habits are we going to in place to make sure that we're consistent with what we want to do? And hydration is one of those things that people know they should drink water, but how do we do it consistently? How can we make sure that we're drinking enough at the right times to get the benefit of it?
And I reckon I'm going to go out on a limb and say that you've put that first because a lot of people might focus on measuring how much aspartame they're consuming before they've actually considered having a glass of water with their breakfast.
100%. It's a great way to start your day. And very commonly I see people jump for caffeine or jump for, energy products, stimulants, etc., rather than just thinking about the first thing you put in the body in the morning, like set the tone. You're waking up dehydrated. So put yourself in a position in terms of a high performance habit by drinking some water.
Simple. So next, fundamental.
I'm going to talk about protein. Again, this is one that's getting a lot of noise for the right reasons. But I think what we want to think about is how much do we need? Why is it important? And where are we getting it from? Again, because there's a lot of noise and you see the word protein plastered on a plethora of products. That's a lot of P's in one sentence.
Yeah, wow.
Thank you very much.
Platypuses.
Yeah. It can be maybe a bit confusing. Just because a Weetabix product has protein on it or a bar has protein on it, is it a good quality source, etc.? I think what people might associate also protein with is that they have to go to the gym to eat protein. Or, can my nan have protein? Can my mum have protein, etc.? Well,
do you take protein rather than consume protein? It's always been one that Jamie and I laugh at length. It's like, you on the protein? It's like, what? Just drinking one of the three major macronutrients.
And exactly that's it there, is that it's just identifying, look, the macros, the big three: protein, carbohydrate, and fat. Protein is something that ideally we should look at distributing across the day in terms of getting a nice balanced intake. Often I see people have a bit of a skewed distribution. Evening meal, we can be quite good around chicken, beef, salmon, tofu, etc. Often, again, breakfast and lunch, if it's a bit on the fly, if people are, starting out and just looking at their nutrition overall, trying to get, a good source of quality protein at three of your pillar meals per day would be a really good starting point. Protein does way more than build muscle. It helps you feel fuller between meals. So if you're trying to have a really good balanced intake and not snack and not overconsume, protein's really satiating. It's involved in many processes within the body, whether we're looking at enzyme production, whether we're looking at supporting kind of hair, skin and nails as well. So there's loads of benefits to it, far beyond people just chugging protein shakes and protein bars. And particularly if you're someone like me who's getting closer to 40 and getting older, we don't absorb and digest as much protein as we did when we're younger. So if we want to think about keeping bone strong, keeping muscle mass, or maintaining muscle mass as we get older, we potentially need even more protein the older we get compared to when we were younger.
So for those listening, if we were to give minimum recommendation, those looking to take control of their health as a recommendation, and then those that are a bit more athletically or recreationally focused on training. What amount of protein should people be focusing on? And I guess let's caveat that again with in grams per day, or for those people that might want to track their food, servings per day. So for those three categories, which I think covers pretty much everybody that will be listening, how should they consider protein intake?
Even if you didn't want to track it, like if I was having a conversation with a family member, I would get them to look at their hand and look at the palm of your hand, size and thickness. That is roughly a serving, a portion of protein. So that could be chicken, beef, eggs, fish, etc. That on a plate is a really good portion size. It's not exact, but it's a pretty good measurer of what you need. And if you can have one of those servings at 3 meals a day, that's probably going to give you between maybe 20 to 40 grams of protein per 3 meals, which is a really, really good starting point. If someone goes to the gym and exercises, then minimum in terms of grams per kilogram of body weight, I would say 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day is a good starting point. And if you're thinking about that number, I would always say, well, look at where you are now, look at your 3 meals and which meal maybe doesn't have any protein in it or not enough. That's the meal to start with. The further up the spectrum you go in terms of if you're someone who does a lot of strength training, if you're a bodybuilder, or if you're someone who's dieting, you might want to aim even higher than that. But, let's have a sensible starting point. Let's look at what you currently do. 3 meals a day. Is there protein in every meal? And then we can look at, snacks and supplements to that number.
Okay. And any vegetarians or vegans listening, more difficult to get, isn't it? You went through a period of being plant-based yourself. So you've been in the ringer. You've been the man in the arena for this.
Walked the walk, talked the talk, ate the tofu.
There we are. How was it? What did you season it with?
Everything.
To no avail.
Everything.
So for anyone listening that might not, for whatever reason they choose, if they are looking at their hand, can they apply the same principles? Do they need to think about things a little bit differently? Because there's incomplete and complete proteins, which people will hear talked about online as well. What do people need to understand within this context?
Yeah, it's a little bit more challenging. If they're vegetarian, obviously, we've got eggs, we've got things like, Greek yogurt, skyr, quark, fantastic kind of dairy-based sources. If we're going fully plant-based, things like tofu and tempeh would fall into that hand kind of portion method. If we're looking at other sources that will give you high protein options, this is where we want to look at more kind of beans, lentils, legumes, and then topping up proteins from other sources, things like nuts and seeds, even foods like oats. You'll be surprised. Have a look on some labels when you turn a packet over. A lot of foods will not just be one macronutrient. There'll be a mixture of proteins, fats, and carbs, so you can kind of bump numbers up a little bit. Again, working towards that 20, 30, 40 grams per day. Often, if I'm working with a vegan or a vegetarian, rather than them having 3 big servings of protein a day, what's sometimes easier is kind of splitting that down into maybe 5 or 6 feeds of smaller doses, because it's easier for them to get 15 or 20 grams at a time, and we do that multiple times a day.
And generally speaking, the way to maximize your protein range in terms of complete and incomplete is by having a varied protein supply if you're vegetarian or vegan, isn't it? So that you can tick all the boxes that are easier to achieve through animal protein.
Yeah, and you can even look at things like if you have peanut butter on wholemeal toast. That's
trying to kill me, Tom. Trying to kill me.
Sorry, not you personally, Fergus. But that's a complete protein source. If you take pasta and peas, that's a complete protein source. So just by doing a little bit of research, it's very quick to start to pull these kind of combinations together. Obviously, let's say you can use these, tofu, tempeh based. I'm not so big a fan of the kind of meat alternatives. I would rather people look at like a whole food kind of based approach for protein sources. But yeah, there's lots of combinations out there that can help you hit, 1, a complete protein source, and 2, making sure you just get enough leucine, which is the key amino acid within protein that will help drive muscle protein synthesis.
I think there's 2 things I'd add to that from personal experience and conversations. Is number 1, just because it says protein on it, it does not mean that it is actually ticking the boxes you expect it to. I think Nature Valley have a few bars that are taking the piss. It's like 6 grams of protein, and they've put protein on the front, and suddenly it's 4 pounds rather than 2 pounds. So recommendation, read the labels. And secondly, supplementation for either animal protein consumers or vegetarians or vegans. is a great way to, if you are struggling through your 3-4 main meals, you can easily top it up as a snack throughout the day. And it's not something to be demonized. Find something that sits well with your gut, find something that's easy to consume, find something you enjoy, which is quite easily done in this day and age. And you don't need to feel that convenient protein is inherently a bad thing because Eddie Abu told you it was, because convenient protein is better than not having protein and having 27 chicken nuggets instead. So there we are. I'm going to try and not get sucked into anti-Eddie Abuing in this podcast, because I think that's a slippery slope. But those are the only two things I would add there. And I'm personally a huge fan of tracking, as long as somebody has a positive relationship with the numbers and doesn't make it something that they become a little bit too obsessive over. I've seen people go down that road before, but I think, as you said, portion sizes, handfuls, things like that, having protein in every main meal is a great starting point as a habit that you can then develop and analyze as you go. So, water, protein, what's next?
Plants.
Tell me about plant. We have a fake plant here, actually.
Yeah, and don't start chewing on that.
My statement before this was, wow, this is such an easy thing to take care of. Why aren't all plants in this building fake? So,
again,
tell me why, Tom.
This is something, again, that people should probably know they should do, but it's the doing, it's finding the application and finding the strategy to do it. But the benefits to eating a colourful diet are tenfold. Whether someone's an exerciser and they want to stay fit, healthy, strong, recover from training, whether we're thinking about fibre intake for gut health, whether we're thinking about mood, whether we're thinking about antioxidant, polyphenol-rich food, the data is vast. And often I see a real correlation between food quality and then enjoyment and longevity and recovery. And it's massive. Again, what I want people to think about is look at what you currently do. And I'm not saying people do a bad job, but it may be that a meal that you currently have, has maybe one color on that plate. It could be you have chicken for your protein, you've got some potatoes, and you've got some green beans. Great. How can you add more color to that meal? How can you take what you existingly do and add more micronutrition, add more diversity that's going to be great for all those benefits I've just listed off? Sometimes a bit of a challenge that I think people find with it is they see it as an inconvenience. So what we need to think about is what strategy can we use, can we implement? And this is going to be different for everybody that's listening, but to increase the micronutrition of your diet, whether you want to add frozen fruit to a smoothie, throw it on top of yogurt.
Handful of spinach is my personal favorite.
Fantastic. Whether we want to think about, just buying, some mixed salads to put in wraps at lunchtime, whether we want to, if you want to batch cook off a tray of vegetables and then throw it into things like omelets, microwave, reheat. You can use, frozen veg that can be thrown into a stir fry, a pasta dish, etc. But so often I find when working with anybody at any level, if they improve the quality of their diet, they just feel better. More energy, better recovery, better skin, better mood, better gut health. The body is incredible at kind of upregulating its own antioxidant system. So if you just keep giving it more of the good stuff, it will kind of pay you back in kind. So yeah, plants is a big kind of overarching term, but I think it's very important when, let's say, thinking...
Keep it front of mind.
Yeah, thinking about, every time you sit down to have a meal, protein and plant should be the first two things that are on your plate or in your bowl.
Common objections. It's more expensive, and therefore it's difficult to access those things if you're on a tight budget for a family or something like that. What are the lowest hanging fruit, pun intended, considerations for people that are wanting to implement more plants into their diet, but might have that as an objection or something that they've found to be the case with their shopping habits? Have you had discussions with clients in the past where you've overcome that?
I think, one, I'm a big fan of the freezer section. So there's no waste. So you can buy, like say, mixed bags of frozen berries, which are far cheaper than buying things fresh. Nothing's going to go off. You can get things out and they can defrost and thaw to be used that day or next, like say, or they can be put in smoothies, yogurts, etc. You can even get most different kind of assortments of vegetables now, whether you want Mediterranean veg, whether you want the kind of mixed bag, whether you want to get individual, all the way from kind of chopped onions to green beans to peas, I think could be quite easily added to existing meals. I think sometimes people find a challenge to try and add extra to a plate, whereas often if you're cooking something in a pan or a pot or a slow cooker, it's very easy to add to it. I'm a big fan of using things like soup can be a great option. Pesto can be a good cheap, the old student favorite. But yeah, I think really utilizing your freezer and just be a little bit organized each week in terms of even when you're buying things, you can potentially kind of freeze stuff. So it's not going to, often what a lot of people do is they buy it, it goes right at the back of the fridge, they forget about it, and then they pull it out at the end of the week, it's gone off, it's gone moldy, and they haven't utilized it. So a little bit of planning sometimes goes a long way in terms of maybe mapping out what you're going to eat and when across the week, so where you can use these options throughout your kind of weekly intake.
Best example here in the UK that I always use on this is a pack of frozen berries, 200 grams, 100 grams of raspberries is £2.99 most of the time, I think, in most supermarkets, give or take these days. Frozen berries that'll last me, I've got my metric system wrong here. I'm working in bowls of porridge. So in bowls of porridge, I will get 2 at a push bowls of porridge out of 1 £2.99 punnet of raspberries. I will get 12 bowls of porridge out of 1 £2.99 packet of frozen raspberries. And the risk of it going off, me going away for the weekend and it going moldy, is all gone. And it means that I can plan around that. It's more cost effective, and it's always something that I can add to things to make it a little bit easier, even if that's chucking it on a bit of Weetabix because I ran out of porridge oats that weekend or whatever it might be. So total agreement from a personal application point of view, because I think the default in our household is to not cook with as many fruit and vegetables as, for example, my parents do whenever we're around. They're really good at doing dals and things like that and being more creative, whereas Erin and I have almost default meals that we need to consciously add vegetables into because they're not inclusive in the recipe. So look for the things that you can add in that don't add, again, handful of spinach, even things like making your gravy onion gravy or adding some wilted spinach into the side of potatoes that you've got. It's real easy things like that. And again, a bag of spinach is not going to break the bank. And if you use it serving by serving, you can even get frozen spinach. You can put it in the freezer. We've got frozen spinach that will then go straight in smoothies and be really, really useful there. So I think waste management and the frozen section, total agreement, are the best way to overcome what is a common objection, which is eating healthier is more expensive. Not to say that it isn't in some ways. I mean, if you go to Whole Foods versus Morrison's Cafe, it's going to be a very, very different experience. But I think there are things you can do to find a middle ground that suits any individual circumstances for the most part. So, number 4, 3 down: hydration, protein, plants. Number 4.
I'm going to talk about healthy fats because I feel like fat has got a bad rep.
Yep.
And there's lots of, again, positive benefits of, if we look at some of the healthiest people in the world, particularly like Mediterranean diet, they consume the right amount of healthy fats. And the research that was done on kind of, taking fat out of food, etc., we're now finally kind of shedding light on that and debunking things a little bit, that dietary fat's very, very important. Yes, it comes at a higher calorie cost, but in terms of the benefits and often removing fat from your diet completely, I've seen people really struggle in terms of energy production. I've seen people struggle with, hormone production. There are certain vitamins and minerals that we eat. Vitamins A, E, D, and K are fat soluble. So if we're thinking about eating more colorful food, if we're thinking about eating a nutrient-dense diet, we want this food to be digested and broken down. So we need to be thinking about, actually, have I got across my week, even across my day, some good sources of dietary fat? It is a good source of energy, help with satiety as well. Have you got things like nuts and seeds? Have you got, which again are a plant as well, by the way, so good bang for your buck there, and a little bit of source of protein. Have we got maybe something like some olive oil, some avocado oil? If you are a meat eater or you like fish, some kind of, some fatty fish and fatty meat across the week, these things can help with recovery as well, give you things like, B vitamins. We've got iron in red meat, etc. So they bring a lot to the table nutritionally. So whether we're looking at sources of fat, iron, B vitamins, energy production, hormone production, there's a lot going on, and it's something I see because it saves calories. It's often the first thing that goes. Everything's low fat, got to strip it back, whereas actually it plays an important role. So just, again, think about your current intake, think about what you're doing across the week, and is this something that you've naturally cut out because you think you're being healthy, Whereas actually, if we circle back to that previous point of the challenge of food is expensive, for me, I see it as an investment. And it might be a bit of a blue sky thinking, but let's say you work in an office environment. If you go into that environment well hydrated, with good nutrient density in your diet, what's the chances are you're going to perform better in your job? What's the chances
that be happier overall?
X number of years down the line, you gain a promotion, or you're happier in your relationships, or you're a better husband, wife, friend, etc. Effectively, what you do with nutrition might pay that back. So that's something to maybe think about with a challenge. If someone said things are expensive, well, so's medication, so's not being able to play with your grandkids. There's lots of trade-offs to being unhealthy. So that would potentially be my challenge back, is to get you to think about, is there an opportunity to increase nutrient density from more protein, more plants, and the right amount of dietary fat?
Fantastic. Number 5, the 5th fundamental. I think actually one thing to add there, you might make this the 5th, I don't know. But in terms of supplementation, I know the main supplements you always recommend are very much ticking a lot of the boxes we've already discussed. So bonus round, 4.5, what are the supplements that you recommend people from all walks of life are consuming? And then for anyone that's a bit more athletic, what should they add in?
Often people in the Northern Hemisphere, vitamin D is a big one. Lack of sunlight or lack of exposure to sunlight. So even in the summer, you wouldn't think of it outside today in Scotland, but we are in the summer. We're indoors all day. So even the part of the day that's sunniest, where we could gain exposure to the sun, we're inside. Most people in the UK, Northern Hemisphere, will be vitamin D deficient. So that's a supplement to highly recommend. NHS will recommend everybody takes vitamin D, helps with force and power production. If you're a gym goer, helps support your immune system for all of us. And it's very hard to derive the amount we need from food alone. Omega-3, as you've alluded to, again, one that's really hard to get from food. You can get it from oily fish, salmon, mackerel, trout, sardines, herring. Most of us don't eat 3 to 4 portions of that per week. You can get it from walnuts, chia seeds, flax seeds, etc. But again,
it's a lot of them, isn't it?
It's a lot of chewing. So again, from the blood work I've seen, from the dietary analysis I've done with most people, omega-3 again would be another supplement. Helps from reducing inflammation in the body. So that could be inflammation from stress day to day, but also be inflammation from training. So there's a real nice crossover between vitamin D and omega-3 there.
Creatine, 5 grams a day?
Big fan of it, whether you're a gym goer or not, because the more research I see on it, the benefits to cognitive function, alertness, is fantastic. Not just for those looking to get stronger, build muscle. If you're an endurance athlete, listen to this. The benefits now for endurance training. The more I read about it, everyone should be consuming it, particularly if you're vegan and vegetarian, because you can get creatine from red meat. It would be highly recommended looking at supplementation. You can load it. Some companies will recommend you take a higher dose. It just means you saturate yourself a little bit quicker. And some people only take creatine on a training day for some reason. Not quite sure what that is, maybe just a bit of misinformation. So it's something you can take every day. 5 grams per day would be the recommended dose to start with. Yeah.
And if we use an example to consolidate a lot of what we've discussed, let's say somebody's morning routine, very popular as well at the moment, their breakfast or their post-workout meal or whatever it might be, could be a nutrient-dense, protein-dense, fruit, handful of spinach dense with 5 grams of creatine smoothie, which ticks many, many boxes at the same time. And then you could even have a handful of omega-3 and wash it down with the smoothie. And all of a sudden, let's give James Clear a shout out, as every podcast recording in the history of the world probably should. Habit stacking. It's a huge way of making it easy. What you want to try and do with all these things is not be overwhelmed by how many things there are to potentially consider, depending at what point you are on this journey, so to speak. But it's how do you add these things easily and seamlessly into your existing habits and routines, rather than trying to strong arm them in and chokehold creatine into your day-to-day routine, because you might miss 3 or 4 days and think, oh, well, fuck it, game over. Never mind, that's that. Gave it a go. Creatine's not for me. I think I'll just go back to having black coffee first thing in the morning and, I don't know, vape for lunch. You never know. But that was 4.5. So, number 5. Maybe do you think we can finish on 5? Make it the 5 fundamentals of nutrition? So, I'm hovering. I'm giving you a virtual drum roll here. Number 5 is?
It's not directly nutrition related, but it relates to nutrition. And for me, it's sleep.
Okay.
Because it's the biggest driver that I see leads people to make poor nutritional choices. If you have a bad night's sleep, the likelihood is you'll be running low on energy. It's like the petrol warning lights on. We've all been there. We've had a bad night's sleep, whether that's self-inflicted or people who've got kids, late, stressed, worried, early start. It's going to affect your blood sugar. And the likelihood is you're going to want to consume often kind of hyper palatable, high fat, high sugar, high carbohydrate food. So the biggest thing I would always recommend to people is have a solid sleep routine. I think we all lead very busy, very kind of fast paced lives. We're on our phones very late. And it's often the point where, right, put the phone down, get into bed and try and fall asleep. I think if you can signal to your body to have some sort of wind down routine, work back from when you want to be asleep, the likelihood is you will fall asleep quicker and improve that kind of sleep latency, get into that kind of REM and deep sleep and start to get into your sleep cycles more effectively. If we're stimulating our brain right up until the point of where we want to be asleep, I think that's a recipe for disaster, not only with that night's sleep itself, but I say the following day. If we make the nutritional choices quite reactively, I think we can all probably agree that often that doesn't lead to the smartest choice. So it's like getting on the treadmill and putting the incline on 10% and trying to run a personal best. You're going to make things very, very difficult for yourself. So I think sleep has a big carryover between how much we are potentially likely to consume in terms of calories the following day. Often if people eat too many calories, that can affect things like mood. That can obviously affect things like body composition, recovery from training, etc.
Bonus round, caffeine. How should people consider it?
I'm a big fan of caffeine.
So am I.
For me, it's got to be used in the right way at the right time. 2 ways to look at this. From a general health point of view, I would utilize caffeine in the first 8 hours of your day. So have some sort of cutoff. Caffeine has a half-life. So 6 hours after you consume caffeine, 50% of it will still be in your bloodstream. So if you knock back a double espresso at 4 p.m, come 10 o'clock, you've still got half of that espresso in your bloodstream. And often I get a bit of kickback. People are like, oh, I can have a caffeine hit late in the day and fall asleep. I'm like, great, you're fatigued, but the quality of your sleep isn't going to be that great. So I would have some sort of cutoff, whether that's 2 o'clock, whether that's 12 o'clock. So you're a little bit strategic with it. And then if you actually focus more on your hydration habit, if you focus more on your food quality habit and eating plants, you'll get energy and you'll feel more alert from those sources rather than relying on a caffeine pick-me-up. Caffeine around training, I'm a big fan of. Utilizing it to help with alertness, reduce fatigue, and for some people, it just puts them in that kind of right mindset. Caffeine is obviously a social thing. I know people like to meet for coffee, etc. Be aware of sometimes what your coffee might come with. How much milk is in it? How much sugar in it? Are there hidden calories? So it's something just to be aware of in terms of you might eat a nutrient-dense diet, but there might be things that are slipping in your diet that are coming from kind of caffeine habits because of the amount of calories that come with it.
Alcohol. Just throwing buzzwords at you here. I think this is the final thing to really consider that comes up as a sort of pillar of the fundamentals. So how should people consider alcohol within sensible nutrition as a habit?
For me, you have to look at the trade-offs. If I'm being really honest, caffeine is going to affect your sleep quality. It's probably going to lead to poor nutritional choices, whether it's at the time of consuming alcohol. We've all been there. We get snackish, we get peckish, we eat probably more than we should do. Alcohol obviously comes with a calorie allowance to it as well. But potentially, what nutritional choices are you going to make the following day because of your alcohol choices the day before? If you're someone who goes to the gym, likes to lift weights, alcohol is really going to blunt your potential of progress. So for me, I would potentially think about being a bit more strategic with where you use your alcohol consumption. Might it be at the furthest point between kind of gym sessions? So say if you've done a Friday night gym workout and then you're going to have 2 days off and back in the gym Monday, maybe Saturday night is a good time to have a drink or two. It's not near your training at any point. You're going to be able to catch up on sleep, and it's not going to impair muscle protein synthesis too much. Yeah, just look at context, I think, when it comes to alcohol. Like anything, I'm not saying it's off limits. I'm not saying you should have none, but it's what's the repercussion? What's the effect if you do have alcohol? Are you able to control your portions? Do you have to put some form of portion control in place to make sure that you have smaller bottles of beer, or don't have a whole bottle of wine? You buy individual servings, whatever you need to do. It's no different to managing your own food intake. You just have to have some sort of strategy so that you can be consistent and not have to kind of restart every week because you've written off 2 or 3 days of your intake from one bad mistake potentially.
Fantastic. I think we've touched on the 5 fundamentals according to Tom, and your wealth of experience working with people across a range of different demographics, ages, sporting focuses, jobs, etc. So if you're listening and you think that's been quite top line, that's been quite simple in many ways, it's the point. Is you can interact with all these things to find what works for you, find where you choose to make your trade-offs versus where the bodybuilder that's about to step on stage in 3 weeks will make theirs. Very different sets of circumstances. But I think that gives people a lot of food for thought. Another pun. I'm on fire today. This is wonderful. Tom, where can people find you?
They can find me on the internet. If you go to Instagram, I'm on there, tmc.nutrition. And you can also find me via the Omnia Performance website as well.
The what? Sorry, I've never the
Omnia Performance.
Oh, cool, interesting. I'll check them out. I'll be sure to check them out. They sound like pretty cool guys. Anyway, thank you very much. The fundamentals of nutrition, everybody. Cut through the noise.